Hi, everyone. Obviously, there was big news overnight about this U.S. attacking three key nuclear facilities in Iran early Sunday, basically joining in Israel's war against Iran, escalating tensions all over the Middle East. It's a quickly developing story. David Frum is one of my favorite writers from The Atlantic. He's written 10 books, including Trumpocracy, The Trumpocalypse. You were a speechwriter for George W. Bush, and from 2014 to 2017, David chaired the prominent UK center-right think tank called Policy Exchange. And David, I know you wrote a piece about this on President Trump's decision, and it was basically called "The Right Move, Wrong Team." Let's start by asking why you believe it's the right move at this point.
Thank you. So I wrote this piece in the very early morning hours of today, Sunday, June 22nd. I'd be remiss. Builds on a longer conversation I had on a podcast I recently launched with Kareem Sadjapur, who I believe is also a friend of yours. Um, and we'll be talking more about Iran in the coming week. Uh, Look, every American president, going back to the Clinton years, has said it would be unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And the United States has had a series of different policies to try to prevent this outcome, but none of them have been very successful. President Obama negotiated an agreement with Iran, but I think even the Obama people would say it was a pretty inconclusive deal. It was time limited. It had big problems with the inspection regime. But the reason the United States always accepted these inadequate substitutes was because they were negotiating essentially that Iran had a gun to everybody's head. Iran had this big and growing ballistic missile force in Iran. It had the Hezbollah missile force right on Israel's borders. It had proxies all over the region. So you couldn't be as tough with Iran as you would like to be because they had a lot of retaliation they could do. That changed in the past year. Iran, in April of last year, launched a big missile barrage against Israel, triggering a series of that was the beginning of Iran to Israel air war. And Israel has step by step removed from Iran its ability to retaliate. The Iranian Hezbollah is gone. The Hamas is broken. The Iranian ballistic missiles have been disarmed over the air war on June 13th. And so the United States, under President Trump, now confronts a very new scenario, which is same old policy: Iranian nuclear bomb unacceptable. New reality: Iran no longer has a gun at the world's head. And little as one trusts, or little as I trust or admire President Trump, he was here acting, I think, in the tradition of American foreign policy and preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, not just for 10 years, the way Obama tried to do, but forever.
Well, so he got rid of the Iran nuclear agreement in 2018. He didn't think it was enforceable. And yet, when I looked at a chart, David, about nuclear development, which is, I think, being shared by a lot of people, there was very little enrichment of uranium going on. And then it skyrocketed to
Yeah,
unprecedented levels up to 2019.
yeah.
So, it sounds like after the nuclear deal was stopped by President Trump, they did increase their capacity to make a nuclear weapon. Is that not accurate?
That is totally accurate. I don't think getting rid of the deal in 2018 was a great decision. Because obviously in 2018, Iran did have all of those guns at the world's head. And in 2018, look, the big problem with the Obama deal, from my point of view, was the United States paid a big price up front. Iran got sanctions relief. It got a lot of cash, and it collected the benefits on the back end. So you don't sign it. It would seem to me you don't sign in the first place a deal with Iran. Would they get their, you pay up front and get your deal on the back end. But once the deal is signed and you have paid up front and you're getting the benefits on the back end, you should stick around and collect the benefits on the back end. So I don't think Trump did the right thing in 2018. And in 2018, it wasn't clear what alternative there was to the Obama deal because, again, they had all the guns at everybody's head. But this is not 2018. This is 2025. Trump's not the president I would have wished for. And this is not the team you would wish for. And we have real vulnerability. One of the Iranian obvious moves is to hit back with terrorism, not just inside the United States, but worldwide. And we don't have a very impressive counterterrorism team in place. All of that said, where we are in June of 2025 is Iran was racing since 2019 toward a bomb. It has seemed to accelerate in recent weeks. And the retaliation, and this is the part of the whole story that is so crazy. Did they not know they'd lost their ability to retaliate? When President Trump's offered them a deal in the past 60 days, it looked a lot like the Obama deal. Why didn't they take it? Why did they notice it? We have lost our deterrent. We should take the deal. And that's, to me, in my mind, one of the big mysteries here is Trump offered them a deal that was pretty good from their point of view. They said no, with no ability to make good if they, on their refusal.
Well, why do you think they did turn it down? We're getting a lot of questions, so hopefully I'll be able to get to some of these questions, David. But why didn't Iran say after President Trump said, let's negotiate, they ignored it?
Yeah, beats the heck out of me. Look, here are the things I'm not: an expert on military technology and an expert on Iranian internal politics. I don't know why they didn't do it, and whether it was ideological, whether there's an ideological problem, whether they just, like many authoritarian regimes, have trouble making decisions. If you've got a supreme leader and he's almost 90 and he is ill, how do things even happen? I don't know. So I don't know why they didn't do it. But in retrospect, they've made a series of bad moves. The October 7th attack on Israel triggered a whole chain of events, but their situation changed with the loss of Hezbollah. When Israel disarmed Hezbollah effectively or neutered Hezbollah, their situation changed again after June 13th. It's baffling, and maybe the regime is just that ideological. Maybe their elevation of martyrdom as the central goal of policy. Maybe that's what's at risk. Maybe it's just paralysis. I don't know, but they made a big mistake, and now they're paying for it.
We're going to talk about, why Congress wasn't consulted and what happens next. But can you explain to me again, maybe my smarter followers understood the difference between 2019 and now, and the idea that Iran had a gun to everyone's heads and it didn't? What happened in those 6 years?
So in 2019, during the first Trump administration, um, Iran has a series of proxy armies all over the Middle East. So they've got, first, in Lebanon and also in Syria, Hezbollah, an incredibly elaborate paramilitary force, a political force too, with a lot of missiles. And Israel tangled with Hezbollah in the earlier 2000s, and the war was kind of inconclusive. Israel did a lot of damage to Hezbollah. Hezbollah did a lot of damage to Israel, and neither side wanted to fight with the other again. But Israel had to worry that if you struck Iran, that Hezbollah would launch thousands of missiles into northern Israel. Hamas had a lot of influence over Hamas on Gaza, on Israel's southwest.
You mean Iran? Yeah.
Iran, sorry. And Hamas was not as formidable a force as Hezbollah, but it could wreak a lot of havoc. Iran had the Houthi militia down in Yemen at the bottom of Saudi Arabia, where they have ability to interfere with world shipping. And they had the ability to do terrorism worldwide, and they had their own military force in Iran that could hit Israel. So in 2019, if the United States had bombed Iran, Iran would have activated Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. It would have fired its own missiles into Saudi Arabia. It had a lot of ways of striking back. Um, after in the past year, Israel has disarmed Hezbollah with that famous pager operation. Hezbollah is a broken force. Hamas is beaten into the ground. Iran's missile force has been depleted. They attacked Israel in April of 2024 with missiles. They fired 300 missiles at Israel and it was not very effective. On June 13th of this year, Israel began striking Iranian ballistic missile forces, and again had, as of 2 days ago, knocked out about half their rocket launchers. So
So what you're saying is Iran's military and the proxies that it has throughout the region has been significantly degraded in the last 6 years.
There's an old, right, exactly. There's an old joke attributed sometimes to Al Capone that you get more with a kind word and a gun than you get with a kind word alone. So the situation was, on after June 13th, the United States under President Trump was saying, sign on the dot. We're going to give you a deal that's almost exactly the deal that Barack Obama gave you. No more cash, but you'll get some sanctions relief. But what you have to do is no more enrichment. You can keep what you have. You can keep everything you have, but no more enrichment. Sign here. And the smart answer to that would be, we're in a much worse position than we used to be. Maybe we should sign here and keep what we have. And they said, no, blow it out your ear. Um, and uh, and we'll fight. We'll fight if we have to. But you can't anymore. You've lost the capacity to fight. Why are you doing this?
Well, let's talk about that. I would love to know. I mean, I've been trying to understand how close Iran is to actually transferring the enriched uranium for commercial use, right? For regular power to actually making a nuclear bomb. And I've read no one seems to agree on a timetable, and perhaps it's because the inspectors aren't shown everywhere, the International Atomic Energy uh, folks. And so what is your sense in everything you've read and all the people you've talked to? Are they on the precipice of actually having a nuclear weapon?
I have no idea, and I don't think that's really the right question, with respect.
That's okay.
That because when there's a country that wants to get a nuclear weapon, that is making tremendous sacrifices to get a nuclear weapon, that has made clear that it intends to use the nuclear weapon against Israel. The dial you watch is not how close are they, but when is it safe to strike? And let me give you an example from the Korean Peninsula, and that may it's an interesting parallel. So North Korea starts developing a nuclear bomb in the middle 1980s. And the George H.W. Bush administration gets very worried about this, and they come to the brink of war with North Korea in 1989, and the North Koreans back down, and the United States and North Korea make an agreement under H.W. Bush. The Clinton people come to office in 93, and they discover the North Koreans are massively cheating on the deal. And in June of 1994, there is a crisis where the Clinton people say, should we strike the North Korean facility? And the problem they had was North Korea had 1 million men under arms. The border is only 25 miles from the capital of South Korea, Seoul. They had thousands and thousands of artillery tubes. They'd taken the South Korean capital hostage. And the Clinton people weighed very carefully, should we strike? But the price is unacceptable. And in June of 1994, they said, you know what? They've got us to ransom. We'll make a deal. And so they did make a deal. And the deal held, but the North Koreans cheated on that deal. And a dozen years later, middle 2000s, North Korea is a nuclear power. So the question in 1994 was not how close were they. It turns out they were 12 years away. The question was, did you have an opportunity, yes or no, to stop it? And in 1994, the Clinton people decided, not wrongly, in my opinion, there wasn't enough. The price would be, the United States would win, but the price would be too high, too terrible for the South Koreans. So they made the best deal they could, hope for the best, and now North Korea is a nuclear power. But what if South Korea had disarmed North Korea in 1994? What would you have done then? Well, in that case, we stopped North Korea from becoming a nuclear power. Then we bombed their reactor. If they can't hit back, of course you bomb their reactor. And that's an impossible fantasy. That wasn't available. But had it been, the Clinton people would have certainly disarmed North Korea in 1994. That's where we are now. Is the question?
Okay, so what are you saying, David? Are you saying that this was an opportunity and it was the right thing to do by Donald Trump, in your view?
Yes. I think we've now created a situation where Iran will not be a nuclear power. And that's good news for Israel. It's good news for the United States. It's good news for the Gulf states. It's good news for peace in the region. And it's one nightmare that has been alleviated.
Well, the big question is, was this just a one and done situation, which I think the Trump administration is trying to say it was basically a massive surgical strike and then threatening, obviously, if Iran retaliates, that they'll do more. But I guess the question is, what do you expect the Iranians to do? You say their military has been downgraded. Richard Haas, who I'm talking to later this afternoon, was on Fareed Zakaria saying they may not retaliate, but this is a great opportunity for them to reconstitute. Nobody knows how much damage was done to these nuclear facilities. A lot of people think they've moved them around to avoid detection, and now they'll be even more determined to develop a nuclear bomb, a nuclear capability. So, what do you think of that theory?
Well, there are two questions there. What do I expect to happen, and how badly do I think the program has been hurt? I think it looks like the program has been hurt very badly.
But how
Uh,
do you know that? Because The Economist said that it's being overstated. So,
I don't know it at all. Here's why I think it. Um, if you go to the trouble and expense of burrowing under a mountain, you're putting a lot of stuff down there. And if you've got a lot of stuff, and these are cascades of many machines, and there's sequences of machines, and it all has to be very precise. You don't move that stuff around very lightly. And if you've got it under the bottom of a mountain, where else are you going to move it to that's better than under the bottom of a mountain? You can't hide it in a garage or a chicken coop. Having gone to the trouble of putting, so if you put it under a mountain, you're probably leaving it there. And if the mountain gets crushed, the stuff is probably irretrievable. I don't know that means it's 100%, but I don't, and there's no such thing in politics as one and done. I'm not saying that 25 years from now, if that regime is still there, 25 years from now, this won't reappear. But I don't believe they're going to have an easy, when you look at how difficult it's been for them to get to where they are, um, with their facilities more or less intact, I believe we've bought a lot of time. So what do I expect them to do? Back in the 1990s, when the regime was really frisky. They did terrorism all over the world. In the early 1990s, they attacked a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires and the Israeli embassy in Argentina, and they killed 100 plus people. They carried out terrorist attacks in Berlin. They carried out terrorist attacks in Paris and in London. And they went on a global terror rampage. And again, there was a confrontation in the Clinton era where a kind of tacit deal was struck. No more terror. What you do inside the Middle East, we can't control, but no more terrorism outside the Middle East. And that pact held from the late 90s until recently. The Iranians don't anymore do terrorism in Uruguay and Argentina. They don't do it in London and Germany. I think they may revert to that because that's easy. The people are vulnerable. They're not protected. They may start attacking American and Jewish targets all over the world. That will be their revenge, I fear. But I think we're not going to hear about this nuclear program for quite a while now.
so you think the most likely response is not militarily, not necessarily militarily against Israel, but sort of using these sleeper cells all over the world to do, because I asked about that before this even happened. And I was told that that was not going to be the immediate response. But I worry about that too, David, to be honest with you.
Sleeper cells sounds like something from a movie. Um, so in 1993 or four, I'm going to forget the exact date. Uh, Iranian gunmen went to a cafe in Berlin and shot it up and killed a bunch of people. You don't need a sleeper cell to do that. You just need a couple of people with an airline ticket and an ability to buy a firearm. Just fly them in from somewhere, and they can commit mayhem. I don't think there's a sleeper cell in Argentina when they blew up the Jewish community center and killed 100 or so people. You have it's not. Alas, this is the tragedy of human life, and we're all terribly vulnerable. We live in civilian societies and free societies. People come and go, and it's not. And what protects us from terrorism is police forces, which are not at their best in the United States right now, but also deterrence. That's the reason the Iranians got out of that business. Was the United States said, "We'll hit something you care about in Iran if you continue on your rampage in Paris and Germany and Argentina." That's the easiest, lowest tech, least complicated, most hurtful thing that they could do. And it's a safer and it's more deniable than, say, firing missiles into the United Arab Emirates, where the United States could hit back.
Let me ask you about the lack of congressional approval. I have always been slightly confounded by the War Powers Act because it seems to me that many presidents have ignored the War Powers Act, David. And from everything I've read, President Trump briefed Republicans, members of Congress, but not Democrats. Your internet is a little shaky right now.
Um,
Can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Oh,
Your picture is a little fuzzy, but tell me about this lack of congressional approval in the War Powers Act.
so look, this is where we get back. I've been saying pretty nice things about this action. Then we get back to the fact of Trump not briefing the Democratic. Not, and we're not talking about, by the way, all members of the House, all members. We're talking about leadership and Intelligence Committee. The top two leaders on each side in the House and Senate. Not briefing the Democrats. That's not a violation of the War Powers Act. That's just being a dick. Um, you should do that. But what the War Powers Act says is you have that after a strike there's a certain period of time, I forget exactly, I think it's some number of days where the president must give a report to Congress on what was done. And if the troops remain in action, there's a certain number of days, I forget whether it's 60 or 90, after which Congress must affirmatively vote to keep the troops engaged. So Trump is in no violation of the War Powers Act. I mean, we're not 48 hours away if that's the time, and we're certainly not 60 to 90 days, and the engagement has ended, at least so far as we know. What he just did, and this is the problem with this, the story I wrote for the Atlantic was about this is the right move with the wrong team. Like what a president is supposed to do is build consensus and consent behind these big actions, build national unity. And one way you do that is by calling in the leaders of both parties. On a question like Iran, it's not that divisive. Most Democrats and Republicans believe something had to be done. Um, there may be some arguments about what the something was, but no one thinks, oh, this is not a problem. Or certainly no one in leadership thinks that. Bring in the leaders, tell them what's about to happen, and get their approval. Because if anything goes wrong, they're going to be a lot more understanding if they were briefed in advance than if they weren't.
Having said that, there was this important element of secrecy, according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, during their press conference early this morning. And wouldn't that have been a huge risk in terms of keeping this quiet?
So if the suggestion here is that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are bigger blabbermouths than Mike Johnson and John Thune, that's just insulting. Um, that's who we're talking about briefing. Those four people, um, and two of them were briefed. So two are omitted. That's not about secrecy. That's just about being a jerk, and that's just about not being president of all the country. Because you know what, and it's also called being stupid because uh, things are going to. If there's a problem, you need Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to go to their members and say, I knew about this. I thought, I agreed with it. I think this was right. And if this thing turns into a protracted mess and you need a supplemental appropriation from Congress, if Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer were on board, that would make all of that a lot easier. And by the way, when Trump made no case in the country, and again, that's secrecy, but most Americans don't approve of this mission. Maybe more approved today than did for it. But the last time there was a serious poll about how only about a third of Americans regarded Iran as an important national security threat to the United States, somewhat higher among Republicans than among Democrats, but a
Well,
minority among Republicans. So you need validators. You need people in Congress who are on the other side to say, you know what, I have to, on this one, I'm with the president. That's really a helpful asset. And why you'd give that up, that's just foolish.
under what scenario do you envision this potentially becoming a longer, protracted conflict?
So Iran, because they've made such bad, they start shooting at the United Arab Emirates missile. They still have a lot of missiles left and some rockets. They start shooting at Saudi Arabia. Um, Israel is a harder target. The Gulf allies are less. They start blowing up. They attack shipping in either the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. They start carrying out very large scale terrorist operations against civilians in Europe or the Middle East. And not just in Israel. Israel's tough, but they could do terrorism in the United Arab Emirates pretty easily, or other Gulf states. They start just wherever they can reach, they hit, and then the United States will have to do something about that, and that will cost. Just to give you an idea of how much these things cost, Israel has been spending since June 13th $1 billion a day on its countermeasures. Multiply that by the whole region and the larger cost of the United States, pretty soon you're into supplemental appropriations territory. And again, it's just when you realize you're going to be a foreign policy president, you compromise on your domestic agenda a little bit, and You reach out to people in other parties. You speak to the nation, and you do the things that a president does when the president is reminding people the president is not just the head of the government, but the head of the nation. But Trump can't do. He's just never been that person. He's never been there's this line that my former Atlantic colleague Ron Brownstein has that Trump is a wartime president, and the war is the culture war of blue America, of red America on blue America. So he just won't. He can't do it. It's not in him, and it's a real loss.
Isn't participating in this attack? Obviously, I'm stating something that's Captain Obvious, but completely antithetical to what he ran on, and that's why you're seeing this big division among his supporters. In the sort of the MAGA verse, if you will. And why do you think he has flipped so much on that campaign promise about no more foreign wars?
Well, even the most um, chomping at the bit MAGA people, they always had one big exception, which is they campaign, and they've been campaigning for a long time on a war in Mexico. That the idea of MAGA's anti-intervention and they always that always has a caveat, not counting Mexico. So many people, including J.D. Vance, urged the use of rockets and even special forces inside Mexico without the permission of the Mexican government. Now, to do things like that, to do military operations in Mexico with the permission of the Mexican government, the United States and Mexico have been cooperating since the 1980s on all kinds of anti-drug missions. But to do it without the permission, that's an act of war. CNN reported in the early part of 2025 that the Trump administration was flying Predator drones over Mexico without the permission of the Mexican government. And at that time, the drones were unarmed, but they could easily have been armed. And they're preparing for and J.D. Vance and the others, they've been all for that. So there's no consistent, we don't want to be foreign intervention. Their view was, we don't want to have allies. We don't want to tangle with Russia and Iran, and we don't want to support Israel and the Europeans. But for the war we want, which is the one in Mexico, gung ho.
You talk about that Trump, in your latest piece, has not mobilized allies other than Israel. In fact, the Trump administration has alienated allies. So, what role would the allies play, and how does the administration get them into the fold, given what it's done already in terms of NATO, et cetera?
Well, as we saw in the campaign against ISIS, it started in 2013 under Obama and came to a culmination in 2017 under Trump. Your allies do two kinds of things. That was a true multilateral war. Sometimes the allies have special capabilities that the United States doesn't have. Um, they have more. They have people who speak the language. They have people with local knowledge. They don't have as many guns and airplanes and machines as the United States does, but they often have special kinds of information. Especially that was true in the ISIS war. The French, especially, that because they had this kind of diaspora inside France, where there are people who are sympathetic to ISIS. If you captured some of them and questioned them in France, you would get information that was very useful to you in Syria and Iraq. So the Allies, they enhance your power. They also give legitimacy because the American people are not an imperialist people. So when Americans say, "Oh, there's a war," why? It's very powerful to a president say, "Well, I'm standing here with the leaders of both parties in Congress, House and Senate, and they agree. I'm standing here with the Prime Minister of Britain and the President of France and the Chancellor of Germany, and they agree. I'm speaking here. I'm speaking at a NATO summit, and they all agree. And I've made a phone call to Russia and China, and they don't object." The Americans go, "Okay, well, this is all new to us, and we don't have a strong view, but it looks like you've run the things.
Right. But he hasn't done that.
He hasn't done any of that, and that's important. Because he's not that kind of a president, and so um, his interest has always been culture war. His method has always been divisive, um, and that's why he's not a good president to do this kind of thing. But the thing he's done is not it's a good thing done by a bad person in a bad way.
So, what are you looking out for, David, as you kind of continue to cover this in the days and weeks ahead? What are you going to be really looking out for?
Um, I'm not a regional specialist, so I'm going to be running. integrating this into the things I write about a lot. Like, um, Trump says we're not going to put boots on the ground in the Middle East. We've got boots on the grounds in California. I mean, that among the things that Trump has done that's astonishing is sending the National Guard into California without the consent of the governor of the state. Now, the National Guard deploys in states all the time, but at the request of the governor.
Right.
Um, and this is like a military occupation to do that's astonishing to me. So I'm looking. Does he try to broaden his base of support at all? And one great place to start is to say I'm on the phone with the governor. I'm trying to persuade the governor that I'm doing something responsible. And if I can't persuade the governor I'm doing something responsible, then maybe I end the federalization of the California National Guard because we don't do that kind of thing without the agreement of the governor. I think he needs to stop waging economic war on the allies. How do you ask France for help in the region if you're putting all these tariffs on French products for no valid reason? And by the way, pushing the presidential tariff power to the limit and beyond, because the powers that Trump is using to wage the tariff war are very legally questionable. I'll be looking at whether he puts competent people in charge. It is not confidence inspiring to have Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. It's
Well, I
not.
wondered, when I watched that press conference and I saw the address to the nation last night to have Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and JD Vance standing behind him. And I wondered if Americans felt confident in that team.
Yeah. One of three. I mean, Rubio, it makes sense that Rubio is there. Longtime senator from Florida, longtime prominent person in the Foreign Affairs Committee, speaks Spanish, knows that region very well, has thought hard and deeply about these issues. I think it is confidence inspiring to see Marco Rubio there. Pete Hegseth, no. J.D. Vance, not an unintelligent person, but so partisan and divisive. And meanwhile, the thing to really worry about, if it turns out, if my fears are in any way validated, that the Iranian move is terrorism, Kristi Noem, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, they've purged, and within the FBI, they have purged the leading counterterrorism people because they were not pro-Trump enough. And the counterterrorism project across various departments is in the hands of people that you would not normally want to see. So if that's the Iranian move, the defense looks like it's in the wrong hands. I'm sure there are professional people who are good, but many of the professional people have left. And remember, we have a government that was savagely depleted by Elon Musk's random campaign of firing and morale breaking, and many good people left in the first half of 2025.
Well, it's a scary situation, I think, for a lot of people watching because there's so much uncertainty, and I'm interested in knowing when the data will come out about how eroded their capabilities have actually been, because I think right now, at least all the experts I'm seeing, David, say it's unclear. Obviously, there was significant damage, but the extent of the damage is still not known unless you've heard something that I didn't hear this afternoon.
Well, I think the thing I'd be worried about that, to your point, my guess is that most of the machines the Iranians use are smashed up and probably smashed up beyond repair. But all the partially enriched uranium, the Iranians enrich uranium far beyond the level you would need for a civilian nuclear power plant, of which they have one that is operated by the Russians, and they have no plans to build civilian nuclear power plants. So there's some amount of near weapons grade uranium that may be unintercepted. What happens to that? First, is that right? Is there uranium that's at large, and in what amount, and what happens to it? That's a big question. And let's hope that most of it was crushed under mountain. But if not, you can imagine there are things you can do with it, like, for example, building a neutron bomb, a dirty bomb, a radiation bomb. So you don't get a big bang, but you get a lot of pollution, and those can be really nasty devices. And in the hands of a terrorist regime, that's a very dangerous thing.
Someone asked, what will the U.S. or how will the U.S. react when there's an attack on U.S. troops in the region? And I think that's one of the biggest fears, at least in terms of an initial response by the Iranians. You know, what do you think is going to happen then?
Well, the Iranians have been attacking U.S. troops in the region since 1983. Marine barracks in Lebanon. They attacked troops in Iraq, both during the actual combat operation phase in the early 2000s and as recently as 2018 and 2019, that they would fire rockets at U.S. troops in Iraq. So American troops and American vessels have come under Iranian attack often. And to date, the American response tends to be quite targeted, tit for tat. That if the Iranians fire a rocket and hit a base and injure 30 Americans, then the United States does something like that. I think Trump is signaling that if they try that this time, it won't be an equivalent; it'll be much bigger, and we'll see whether that is a deterrent. I would say, but my guess is that the lesson that they may take is don't hit soldiers who can defend themselves. They didn't attack since June 13th. They have not killed a single Israeli soldier, but they've killed a lot of Israeli civilians. And that's
But
the thing.
far fewer than people anticipated.
Yeah. But the point is, they're not looking for military targets. They're looking for easy targets.
And someone finally, and then I'll let you go, asked, what are the consequences of closing the Strait of Hormuz? Which I actually would like to be illuminated on this as well.
The main consequence is you choke off China's supply of oil. Um, uh, 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 I think, and this is a threat that I find very non-credible. So the United States is the single largest producer of fuel in the world. North America, the United States plus Canada, produces about 25% of the fuel in the world, of oil and natural gas. And so the United States, it's not completely self-sufficient because of the distances. Sometimes oil is exported from one port and other kinds of oil are imported. But the United States is self-sufficient. North America is self-sufficient. And Europe imports surprisingly little oil from the Middle East. And from Iran and the Straits of Hormuz in particular, you're going to be choking off oil that goes to China and to India, who are important trading partners for Iran. And second, how do they choke them off? Because their missiles are not working so well anymore. They've tried in the past using suicide patrol boats. You put a bunch of explosive in a patrol boat. But I think with the level of preparedness and the level of American force in the region, I don't think that's going to work. And all it may do is alienate China as any kind of friend of Iran's, not that they're such a good friend in the first place.
Well, you mentioned China, and I'm curious, is China and Russia happy to stay out of this whole thing?
Well, Russia, Putin and Trump had a conversation 3 or 4 days ago where Putin asked Trump not to intervene. And one of the reasons I thought Trump would not do it in the end was because I have never known him to refuse a request of Vladimir Putin's. But this time, to give Trump his due, he did refuse the request. From a Russian point of view, the main interest of Iran is Iran produces a lot of the drones the Russians use in their Ukraine war. And I'm guessing many of those drone factories are in much worse shape today than they were on June 13th. And that is a threat to Russia's ability to get weapons it needs. China likes dealing with Iran because of the sanctions regime. Iran sells oil at a discount. You have to smuggle it past out of the Straits of Hormuz. No one else will buy it, and so China is a low cost supplier of fuel to China, and China cares. But um, the Russians have a big war on their hands in Europe, and the Chinese are uh, regional players. I mean, they can be very aggressive, but they're mostly aggressive in the area around Vietnam and the Philippines, not so much in the Middle East.
Well, David, thank you so much for spending some time with us. As I mentioned, I'll be talking to Richard Haas at 4:30. In
Very,
case you want to,
very
if
interesting,
you
very wise man.
if you want to tune in for that, everyone, and hopefully I'll get to more of your questions. So many unknowns still at this point, and I guess the biggest unknown is what will the supreme leader in Iran do? Will people try demand regime change? Right? The Trump administration was careful to say that this was not a goal of this mission, and I guess the biggest question mark right now, David, is what will the Iranians do?
Well, we've got, I'm back on Wednesday, I'm going to be releasing a video podcast, and by then we'll have 2 more days of clarity. So if people want to know my views on it, I hope they'll watch it. It releases midnight Wednesday
What's
morning.
it called, your podcast?
Called the David Frum Show. It's on the Atlantic site, and
Right.
as I said, we had Kareem Sajapur, and we talked last week. We didn't talk about one of the things I tried to talk about with Kareem was, and maybe this is something a point to end on. You know, the American-Iranian relationship has been so bad since 1979 that we're in danger of seeing only the negatives about Iranian civilization, which goes back thousands of years. I mean, for most of the past 1,000 years, if you were anywhere in Central Asia, from what is now Istanbul to what is now New Delhi, and you bought a beautiful pair of clothes, you're probably wearing a Persian design, and you read a beautiful poem, you're probably reading poetry written in Persian. And if you wanted to write poetry, you probably learned enough Persian to write it. And if you ate a delicious meal, you're probably using cuisine inspired by Persian examples. And forms of the Persian language are spoken all the way into Central Asia and into Afghanistan. That that Persia was kind of like the France of Central Asia. It was the great source of cultural information. The artifacts, the art and archaeology are unparalleled. One of my dearest wishes is to be able to visit someday and see all these monuments I've only been able to read about through most of my adult life. This is a great high culture that goes back hundreds of years, and we have, because it's been run by these misogynistic, theocratic, aggressive terrorist bullies. It's We've lost sight of what the capacity of the society is. So Kareem Sajapur and I talk on last Wednesday about what Iran was, what we hope it to be again. I mean, it is one of the great culture civilizations of the world, and that's its past, and that should be its future.
Yeah, I covered the Iranian hostage crisis. It was my first big story out of college. So I've witnessed this massive change in not only the culture, but in the country and the leadership. And do you think that, sorry, I know I'm going to let you go, but do you think there is possible, we've seen uprisings in Iran. Of course, they've been squashed, but do you think this is an opportunity for uh, a a stronger people's movement in Iran to take over the government or not?
Look, revolutions are bloody and uncontrollable, and uh, when countries make peaceful and successful transitions from authoritarianism, and we have many examples of that, what tends to happen is a faction of the old regime says, you know what, this is stupid. Spain and Portugal were dictatorships from before World War II until the middle 1970s. How did they change? Factions of the elite said, this is stupid. We should join the European Union and join NATO. And the price of doing that is to have free elections. Okay, let's do that. Uh, uh, Uprisings in the street can get really violent, really fast. This regime is a terrorist regime. It's killed tens of thousands of Iranians. It's harmed many. There are many people in Iran who have grievances against the government, and those grievances could express themselves in violent ways.
Well, do you think it's possible that a segment of the Iranian leadership or government or whatever you want to call it, theocracy, could actually rise up at this moment in time?
I don't know enough about Iran to answer that. I just know in other places that when the transition from authoritarianism to democracy happens smoothly and peacefully, that's the way it tends to happen. And when there's a big uprising, you often go from one bad regime to a bloody outcome, and then there's another consolidation of authority because people can't bear the violence around them. So I have no predictions. I don't know enough, but um, I will. I think it is to be hoped that the transition is elite driven and therefore and peaceful, rather than to count on some kind of mass movement in the streets to yield an outcome that is rapid and not too bloody. Let's transition is quick and peaceful and not something horrible.
I'll ask Richard about that when I talk to him at 4:30. David, thank you. And by the way, The Atlantic is just doing such incredible work, everyone. Please support The Atlantic because I think it produces consistently exceptional journalism. And it's certainly one of my go-to sources when things happen in the world. So, David, thank you. Great to see you as always.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye, everyone.